Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. Just a live feed because someone sent me something today which I've commented on many times before, but I do believe we need to talk about again. And this came about because of an article that was on the ABC in relation to children being removed at birth. Now, for me, this has been an issue forever, and I don't understand why it is that department would choose to traumatise a child at the moment of their birth and the parent and associated family members. I cannot understand that under any circumstances. I don't think there's any evidence to demonstrate that a child has been particularly harmed at that particular point, or at least and there isn't enough history of that happening, and it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. However, the department believes right across Australia that if they have determined that a child is at risk, then that parent should have nothing to do with that child from the moment that they're born. And I can remember many instances where I've worked with parents at the moment that the department have been in there soon after a child has been born. In fact, I remember one instance where a woman was still in the stirrups being stitched up at the time that the child was removed. And it's just horrific. I mean, that moment for that woman just sits with her forever. And she's worked very hard to have that child returned to her and deserves to have that child returned, but it hasn't happened. But this is a particularly interesting case, and I'll just run through the news item with you in just a moment so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But I guess the issue here is who makes these decisions, how are these decisions made, and on what basis are they made? In the instance I'm about to read to you from the ABC, it is evident that the primary concern had been this particular person being young and having an intellectual disability. Now, I've worked with many families that have, or many women in particular, where they have been labelled as having an intellectual disability, and it spans from an extreme disability, not being able to cope, not being able to reason, not being able to make sense of things, to people that if you meet in the street or you just meet, or people that I've met, I haven't been able to understand what this disability is that they're all talking about. So what I'd like to do is just go through the article, which I will find, and then talk to you about it. Now, if you could make comments, if you've experienced a child being removed at birth in particular, not just generally, but yeah, just at birth, if you could let us know at CPP so that we could start to record the number of cases that have been experienced. I know that doesn't mean everybody's going to do it, but it does mean that we can start to keep a record of people who have had their children removed at birth, and specifically what that experience is like. And what we'd like you to do is to contact us, have a conversation with us about what this removal did to you, the impact over time that it has on the child, any changes that you may have made in your life, whether there were arguments around your intellectual challenges or physical challenges that came into play and meant that someone had made a decision that you were an unworthy parent. So if you can let us know what those details are, it would be greatly appreciated. Now, this is the article, and so it says, the Children Court throws out plan by New South Wales welfare officials to remove baby from mother at birth. Now, I was particularly interested in this because I've never heard of this happening before. I'm not suggesting that it is unlikely to happen, because it clearly has, but I haven't actually heard of a magistrate throwing out a ruling because they believed that the department had made a mistake. Now, it says here that the separation was planned at least 6 months before the baby was born in April last year. Now, I know that departments, and here in South Australia, they have a division now that works with concerns in relation to unborn children. And that generally is generated by someone who has had their children removed for whatever reason, and consequently, because that child has been removed, clearly the children must be at risk, even though they very rarely take into account the changes that the parent has made. I do know, though, of cases where the parent has been able to retain the child even though they may have other children in care. So to be fair, there have been some assessments that have been made on the parent. Well, you can keep this child, you have made considerable changes, you're no longer with that violent person, you have dealt with your mental well-being, whatever it is, and therefore that person has been able to keep the child. However, it's worth noting that those parents are always looking over their shoulder because the department is always in their life because of all the other kids that are in care. So we must always keep that in mind as well. But this court document goes on to talk about that was planned six months prior to the baby being removed or being born. And it was interesting, though, that the department, they were only able to come to this because most of these cases are in camera, so they're confidential. And this came about, I think, because the timeline of events and actions taken by the New South Wales Department of Community and Justice. Right, now I don't know what those documents specifically were, but clearly they had permission to access them for whatever reason. But the other important thing is the document shows that before the child was born, his teenage mother, who has an intellectual disability, and her foster mother were told he would be taken into care at birth. So way before he was born. So the decision about what should be done in relation to this child was made. And interestingly enough, it wasn't necessarily made by those people that worked with this mother. And we don't know what work was done with the mother prior to the birth either. This document also described a plan to stop the mum, now this is interesting as well, to stop the mum breastfeeding her child. The intervention was planned even though the teenager passed fitness tests. I don't know what a fitness test is. I guess it's a intellectual test maybe, or it's a test about whether this person is capable of understanding the child's needs, connecting with and bonding with the child, all that sort of stuff, I guess, and had the support of the caseworker. Now that's an interesting ingredient here, because my assumption is that someone else had made a decision, that someone who didn't even know this mother, or simply looked at the history and said, well, we can't risk having this child in this person's care because because the mother has an intellectual disability. The DOC decision-making hierarchy, this is it, determined that any plan for the child's placement with the mother's carer would not be supported, and it was decided that the child would be going home without his mother. The child would not be going home without his mother. So, this is the problem. The problem, as I see it often with practice within this environment, is that the people that eventually make the decisions that harm the kids and the parents and everybody else are those people who, I guess I can say, just arrogant. They're focused on looking after their best interests. They're focused on, heaven only knows, making a mistake, and God, they make enough of those anyway, and that they believe that they must be very risk averse and make sure that whatever they do can't be viewed later on in poor light. So they then make decisions because it's easier, they believe, to remove a child because they're the better parent. We know that's untrue too, but they believe that because they're the better parent, they can take care of this kid, which we also know they fail at miserably on a daily basis. It's really interesting always how we can never keep them to account about what they do. In fact, when they stuff up, everybody goes silent, and we're not able to access information either to make an appropriate decision. But they just shut up about it all. Whereas the parent, who sometimes makes lousy decisions too, they get reprimanded, their punitive action is taken against them, and eventually, in most cases, of course, they lose their kids. So, but if a parent makes mistakes, they get punished. If the department makes mistakes, often, unfortunately, the people that make the mistakes get promoted. So who understands what in the hell that's all about? So the document goes on to say that the Children's Court document shows the mother understood parenthood and has passed fitness assessment. So they've done an assessment on this mum, and she wasn't too bad. She was doing okay. The mother attended 4 sessions of a required parenting program. She had contributed well to discuss the discussions in that program and appeared to have insight. And believe me, the department's focused on people having insight. So that was important. And it goes on to say, I'll read a little bit more of what this article says because it's just worth noting the way that other professionals might have viewed it. We shouldn't be sealing any children's fate before it is born, I thought was an interesting quote from a lawyer, human rights lawyer. And so true, that is so true. We should not be doing that. But that's particularly before an adequate assessment has been made. So if this is this mother's first child, then how do we know how she's going to parent and so forth? If she's passed all these assessments and she seems to have some understanding and insight into a child's needs, then clearly at that particular point, she deserves to have her child. So we do need to wonder about the efficacy of the assessments, and the caseworkers had obviously done that assessment and thought she was okay, and the events, or what someone else has interpreted as those events. And this becomes critical in the decision maker, which is the person further up the line, the decision maker's decision in relation to what should happen to this child. So she goes on to say, this is the lawyer, Ms. Shepherd said the plan was to stop the mother's breastfeeding was also distressing a little baby not to have that opportunity where there is no risk issues. I'll talk about this in a second, where the evidence is that everything is going fine for the mother and the baby is heartbreaking. So, a baby is removed from its parents almost every day in Australia. Somewhere today, someone's experiencing the horror of losing their child. And it's not necessary. It may be in some cases, where there's a lot of mental well-being issues, domestic violence, and who knows what else. And there are some where the intellectual disability is so extreme that one wonders how that person can look after a child. But most of the time, these children should not be removed. And so why are we doing it? We're doing it for the reasons that have come out in this article, is because sometimes the decision makers are not those people on the ground. And it goes on to say, the case has also concerned psychiatrist Geoffrey Rickaby, who has advised state and federal governments on child protection to help thousands of mothers who have been separated from their children. He said department officials must learn from the case, which he described as a gross mistake. Something really went wrong. It is the people at that level of management that really need to be educated. Now, it is interesting, isn't it, that firstly a psychiatrist should say that, and secondly that the psychiatrist had identified that the people making the decisions weren't very well educated in the area of child protection, yet they're the ones making decisions about what's right for children and what's right for parents and others, yet they're unable to make those decisions appropriately because they lack the understanding that is required to make appropriate decisions. Now, this was an interesting part of it, which needs to be noted. In the district court case for costs, the girl's foster mother sought almost $40,000 in damages and won. So I think, and I did mention this earlier, but it appears to me that this kid was in foster care herself. Now, if that was the case, if she was in foster care in the first place, one wonders who was the parent. Well, the fact that the parent was kind of the foster parent, but the real parent, the legal guardian of this child happens to be the department, did they not understand enough about their own child to make a decision about whether she could keep a child or not? Clearly not. Clearly not. So just it smells of ineptitude, big time. I find that the foster mother should be compensated for the legal costs. This is what the judge said, I think. She has incurred in her participation in underlying proceedings. So hopefully everybody gets something out of this, because, sometimes the only way we can bring about anything that resembles redemption is for those that are responsible for making poor decisions pay. And, I don't know whether $40,000 is enough. I would suggest that's basically costs. But I would also suggest, like maybe $1 million would have been good. Imagine how that would have helped this mum to get on the way with this kid and to have that invested for the child for later on in life. That there must be other ways by which we can demonstrate to the authorities, or the courts can at least demonstrate to the authorities, that your decision making kind of needs to change in order for all of this to change. We haven't had all that many people online because of the time of day, I think. But welcome those of you that have come online. I see myself in court cases as parity. The real question is, how are we going to change the system and doing this to our kids? And, the system is never going to change unless we, as a community, work to make the changes that are required. So part of what we do here is we bring to attention the issues which come to hand on a daily basis. Talking about removal of kids at birth is an important issue. The inadequacies that sit within the system are important issues, and we all need to talk about them. And we need to get together, though, and have these conversations. So if you're watching this right now, or if you're watching this later, I'd ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can get all these videos and more, or like our Facebook page, share this particular post to let other people know what we're doing. Or get involved with the Child Protection Party. Become involved with us. Join a committee. Become active. Grab a banner. Stand on a street corner. Get a group of other people together. And if possible, given COVID, you have a barbecue. Raise some money, perhaps, for CPP, so we can get people elected into Parliament who can advocate for you, who can be your voice in Parliament, so that the needs of kids are met and their outcomes improved. This is not rocket science, but in order to do it, it needs everybody to get together. Now, my experience is that most people are interested in the well-being of kids. We may have political differences right across the spectrum, and we do within our own party. But at the end of the day, we're here with one thing in focus, and that is to look after kids and make sure that kids have best outcomes that they can. Collectively, we can do this, but as a small group, it's going to be really difficult. So I'm asking you on this occasion to speak to your friends. Let people know about CPP. Let them know what we're doing. Let them know that if they have issues, any issues around kids, whether it be around their concerns around mental health for kids, youth suicide, disabilities for kids, educational outcomes being limited for certain groups of kids. If you want a more equitable situation for children, then it's the CPP that will represent you. Standing on a street corner on your own is not going to help, but if you've got 100 other people standing around you at that particular time, that will make news. So we are there to support you, but in order to do that, you need to support us as well, so that we can be more effective. So I want to thank everybody for being with me today. Look, take care of yourself, and those of you that are in Victoria, you've done a fabulous job around COVID-19. Really appreciate the work that you've done in order to make your state safer, and I'm hoping that Queensland and New South Wales can also make their state safer as well. I live in South Australia, so we're doing okay. However, I'm planning to make a trip next month to Queensland, so I hope they can sort all that out by the time I get there. Take care, everybody. Look after yourselves. And more importantly, be safe.